The company party was packed, lit up by twinkling lights and the sparkle of champagne glasses being raised in enthusiastic toasts. Julia felt on top of the world next to her husband, Thomas, the director of one of the largest corporations in the country. She was radiant in a sparkling evening dress, and all eyes seemed to be on her as she walked among the guests, as if she were the star of the night. Suddenly, her eyes caught a familiar figure in the crowd. Raphael, a name she hadn't heard in years, but which brought back vivid memories of her school days. He was standing there, discreetly, in a corner, with a calm posture and a calm expression. But Julia, overcome by a mixture of arrogance and contempt, couldn't let this opportunity slip away. "Raphael, you here?" Julia exclaimed, with a smile that didn't hide the tone of contempt. She approached, leaving Thomas a little behind, curious about the scene. Raphael looked up, surprised, but quickly disguised it. "Yes, I'm here," he replied calmly. "I figured that after all this time, you'd still be at the factory, not at a gala. But anyway, to each his own, right?" Julia's voice carried an almost cutting sarcasm. Thomas, noticing his wife's tone, approached and asked, casually, who the boy was. "This is Raphael," she explained, "an old schoolmate. At the time, he didn't seem to have much of a future. He was always the boy who stayed behind the scenes." Raphael just listened to her with a serene expression. Inside, Julia's words brought back memories of a youth full of hardships, where he was ridiculed for his humble condition and for having to divide his time between school and hard work to support his family. "Well, Raphael, I hope you're enjoying the event. After all, it's rare to see people of your status at parties like this," said Thomas, laughing next to Julia. Raphael, without losing his composure, looked at the couple and calmly replied, "Yes, it's a special night. It's amazing how life can surprise us, isn't it?" Julia frowned, not catching the tone of his words. "Of course, surprises are the last thing we expect, aren't they?" she said, amused. But there was something in Raphael's gaze that disconcerted her, an unexpected confidence for someone she had always considered insignificant. For a moment, Raphael hesitated to continue there. But when he looked at Julia and Thomas, he decided that this would be the moment to make a few things clear. Julia, still smiling, felt a veiled curiosity about Raphael's enigmatic manner. Something in his posture bothered her. He was no longer the shy boy she remembered. He seemed sure of himself, and his calmness, amidst so many arrogant looks and smiles, moved her. "So, Raphael," Julia insisted, as if she wanted to penetrate his serenity, "you still work at that factory, right? I always thought that would be the best you could achieve. Some of us are simply born to greatness, while others, well, to manual labor, right?" Raphael smiled slightly, but his eyes were steady, regarding Julia and Thomas with a calmness that bordered on disdain. "Yes, Julia, it's true that I was born into different circumstances. Life hasn't been easy for me, but you know what? I found my purpose, and in the end, it was that purpose that brought me here today," he said, looking her straight in the eye. Julia raised her eyebrows and let out a short laugh. "Purpose? And what exactly do you do now, Raphael? It must be something important that brought you here, right?" The question was sarcastic, and Thomas chuckled alongside her, sharing in the amusement. Raphael glanced at Thomas with a slight smile. "I do what it takes to make sure everything runs smoothly at the company. I can't go into details right now, but apparently you'll see soon enough." He glanced around discreetly, taking in the gazes of the other guests, and his expression changed to a seriousness that Julia hadn't expected. "What are you going to see?" she asked, intrigued and for the first time a little unsure. Thomas, realizing that the conversation was taking an unexpected turn, intervened. "Well, come on, Julia. Let's let Raphael enjoy the party in his corner," he said, forcing a smile, clearly wanting to end the conversation. But Raphael continued, "Julia, Thomas, you're right. Some people are born for greatness, and some just to benefit from the hard work of others. Time shows who really deserves to be here." Julia felt the impact of his words, and for the first time, she was silent. Julia remained silent, digesting Raphael's words. She had never seen him with such confidence. To her, Raphael had always been a fragile boy, someone who hid in the shadows to avoid attracting attention. But that night, he seemed like a different person. Even so, she didn't want to give in. "Well, Raphael," she said, composing herself, "enjoy the party while you can. Not everyone has the privilege of enjoying an event like this. It's almost a gift to you, don't you think?" She looked at Thomas, expecting him to laugh along. Thomas, however, seemed a little disconcerted by the change in the tone of the conversation. He gave an awkward smile and looked around, trying to avoid the tension that was beginning to form. Raphael observed everything silently, noting every reaction, every expression. He was in control of the situation, and that gave him a silent satisfaction. "Funny you should say that, Julia," Raphael replied, his voice calm and controlled. "I also see this evening as a gift, just in a very different way than you do." He paused, assessing the impact of his words before continuing. "For some, true greatness lies not in showing off, but in building something with your own hands, in facing difficulties and growing from them." Julia rolled her eyes impatiently. Sure. Working-class philosophy, I understand, but at the end of the day, the reality is that we are in different worlds, Raphael. You, no matter how hard you try, will always be inferior." She gave him a sharp smile, as if her words were a final blow. Raphael took a deep breath and replied, with unexpected firmness, "Maybe I am in a different world, Julia. But the twists and turns that life takes are surprising. Sometimes, those we underestimate have more influence than we imagine." At that moment, a microphone sound echoed through the room, and all the guests were invited to approach the stage for the beginning of the employee recognition ceremony. Julia gave Raphael one last look of contempt before turning, grabbing Thomas's arm, and walking to the center of the room. As they walked, Julia murmured to her husband, "Believe me, this Raphael is nothing more than a dreamer. Soon he will return to reality." Little did she know that reality was about to change completely, and Raphael would be the one to blame. Julia and Thomas stood near the stage, where other directors and prominent employees were also waiting for the ceremony to begin. The host, one of the company's executives, began with a brief speech about the company's values and the importance of dedicated employees who contributed to the organization's growth. Julia listened distractedly, more interested in finding familiar faces to show off her stunning appearance. When the host finally announced that he would call a name of great importance to the stage, someone who had been instrumental in the company's success, Julia prepared to applaud another top executive. But when the name was announced, a stunned silence hung in the air. "Mr. Raphael Martins, please come up to the stage." Julia stood still. She looked at Thomas, who was staring at her with an expression of surprise that matched hers. "Raphael Martins?" she murmured, in disbelief. And then she saw Raphael, the same one she had just humiliated, walking with firm steps toward the stage. He was calm, with the posture of someone who had been through this many times before. Raphael took the microphone, greeted the host, and turned to the audience with a slight smile. "Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be here, surrounded by colleagues and friends, celebrating not only another year of achievements, but the strength of each one of you who work to ensure that this company continues to grow." Julia felt her face flush. It all seemed like a surreal dream. She tried to find an explanation, a mistake perhaps, but as Raphael continued speaking, she realized that the truth was undeniable. He was someone important, someone she never imagined would one day reach such a prominent position. "I would like to share a brief story," Raphael continued, glancing sideways at Julia and Thomas. "Many years ago, I joined this company with nothing, few qualifications, and many dreams. I worked on the factory floor, where I learned the value of effort and determination. And with the support of the people who believed in me, I reached the position I hold today." Julia felt a chill. His words were sharply honest, each syllable a reminder of everything she had ignored. Raphael continued, "Today, I have the privilege of serving as your COO, and I promise you that I will continue to value each and every one of you, regardless of where you started your journey." The crowd applauded enthusiastically, and Julia stood still, absorbing the weight of what she had just witnessed. Julia tried to hide her discomfort as the applause echoed through the room. She felt a mixture of shame and disbelief. How had Raphael, the boy she had humiliated at school, become one of the directors of this company? And worse, how had he managed to earn the respect of everyone there? It was as if the world had been turned upside down. Thomas, beside her, looked at Raphael with a frown. He, who had always prided himself on with his credentials and prominent position, he felt threatened. Raphael's presence, emerging from a reality so different from his own, seemed to shake the solid ground he was standing on. When the applause finally died down, Raphael stepped down from the stage and began to walk around the room, greeting some guests. Julia, trying to regain her composure, pulled Thomas closer and whispered with a slight tremor in her voice, "That doesn't change anything, Thomas. He may be a director, but he's nothing like you. Not after all the effort he's put in to get where he is." Thomas nodded, but the look of uncertainty never left his face. "Of course, Julia, but it's strange. I've never heard of him before." Thomas's voice was more uneasiness than confidence. It was then that Raphael approached them casually, as if their previous conversation had never happened. He offered a polite smile and said, "I hope you're enjoying the party. It's an important night for all of us, after all." Julia tried to force a smile, but her voice came out shaky. Yes, of course. It's an impressive party." Thomas, trying to regain his confidence, said, "So, Raphael, I didn't expect to see you in a position like this. Where did this rise come from? It must have taken a lot of time and luck, I imagine." Raphael kept his calm smile and replied, "It was much more than luck, Thomas. It was hard work, sacrifice, and the opportunities that the generous people around me gave me along the way." He paused, looking directly into Thomas's eyes. "But I've learned one thing. The higher we climb, the more humble we must be. After all, everything we build can be shaken in an instant." Thomas tried to hold Raphael's gaze, but something in the intensity of those words made him retreat. Julia, in turn, felt a twinge of nervousness, realizing that perhaps, that night, they were not the ones on top of the party. Raphael walked away, leaving Julia and Thomas motionless, digesting the impact of those words. The atmosphere of the party, previously light and relaxed, now seemed heavy for the couple. Julia watched Raphael from a distance, greeting other directors and being approached by employees who admired him. His every gesture, every conversation he had, was proof that he belonged in this environment as much as, or perhaps even more than, she and Thomas. Thomas, trying to hide his discomfort, muttered, "He thinks he owns the party now, doesn't he?" As if all this posturing would be enough to erase his past. Julia, her face red with embarrassment, tried to maintain an air of superiority. "This is temporary, Thomas. People like him can't stay on top for long. It's only a matter of time before they fall back to where they belong." At that moment, the host returned to the stage and announced the awards ceremony for outstanding employees. Thomas straightened his posture, certain that he would be called upon at any moment. Finally, something to celebrate, he muttered to Julia, who nodded, eager to distance herself from that awkward moment with Raphael. To the couple's surprise, the host began to praise the next awardee, highlighting his dedication and exemplary leadership. When the name was announced, Thomas couldn't believe what he heard. And the Employee of the Year award goes to Raphael Martins. Applause filled the room as Raphael, with a humble expression, walked up to the stage again. Julia and Thomas were paralyzed, and everyone around them turned to applaud Raphael with respect and enthusiasm. Envy and resentment grew in Thomas's chest, and Julia looked around, noticing that everyone's eyes were now focused on them, watching their reaction to the recognition of the colleague they had belittled. Raphael took the microphone and thanked everyone with sincere words. "It is an honor to receive this award, and I share this recognition with all the colleagues who inspired me to be a better person. I would never have gotten this far without the support of the people who believed in me." After the award, Raphael glanced discreetly at Julia and Thomas, as if the award was a silent message for them. The couple's uneasiness was evident, but the discomfort would increase even more when the host asked Thomas to come up on stage for a few words as one of the company's directors. Thomas swallowed hard, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him. The idea of going up on stage and speaking after Raphael's award ceremony filled him with discomfort. He glanced nervously at Julia, who encouraged him with a forced smile, trying to hide her own tension. He took a deep breath and walked to the stage, feeling the silence of expectation from the guests. When he took the microphone, Thomas tried to begin with his usual speech of gratitude and vision for the future. Good evening, everyone. I want to congratulate our employees for their hard work and dedication. He began, but the words came out hesitantly. The brightness and enthusiasm that the people who used to be present at his speeches now seemed cold and distant. As he spoke, Thomas noticed some discreet looks of judgment among the guests, probably wondering if he really deserved the position he occupied. Each word of recognition he uttered sounded strange to him, because he knew that Raphael, with his story of overcoming and commitment, was stealing the show that night. When he finished, the host took the microphone again, thanking him, but the applause was less warm. Thomas returned to the hall, feeling smaller than ever. Julia was waiting for him, with a tense smile, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Thomas, it was great. You were very professional," she said, choosing her words carefully so as not to aggravate her husband's nervousness. "Professional?" Thomas snorted in response, even more irritated. "I seemed like an amateur next to him." Raphael. He managed to turn the party into a kind of tribute to himself. Julia sighed, trying to calm her husband down. "Look, Thomas, this is just one night. Tomorrow, everyone goes back to their routines, and no one will remember this." Raphael. Before Thomas could respond, Raphael approached them again, this time with a friendly expression. "Congratulations on the speech, Thomas. It's always inspiring to see colleagues who have so much to say about the future of the company," he said, with a slight tone of irony that didn't go unnoticed. Thomas pressed his lips together, but forced a smile. "Thank you, Raphael. And congratulations on your award. It seems you've been doing well after all." Raphael looked at him for a long second before replying, in a calm and clipped tone, "Thank you. But, Thomas, success is just the beginning. True greatness comes from how we treat people along the way." The silence that followed made Julia and Thomas uncomfortable. Raphael walked away, leaving them alone with their own thoughts. Thomas and Julia stood still, processing what Raphael had said. There was something disturbing about his calmness, a confidence that neither of them fully understood. Julia felt a wave of anger and embarrassment. Everything she knew about status, about success, seemed to go up in smoke in the face of this unexpected presence. "Thomas, you need to pull yourself together," Julia muttered, trying to maintain her composure. "Let's not let him think he's winning." Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath to calm his own wounded pride. But the evening still had surprises in store. As the guests returned to their fellowship and murmurs echoed through the room, the host announced something that froze the couple in place. "Before we end the ceremony, we have an important announcement for all employees and partners present," the host said. "Our new Vice President of Operations will officially take over next week, and he is none other than Mr. Raphael Martins." A buzz filled the room. Eyes turned to Raphael, who simply nodded with a small smile, as applause began to echo through the room. Julia and Thomas watched in shock, unable to hide their astonishment. The man they had despised, the former colleague they had humiliated, was now the vice president of the company, occupying a higher position than Thomas. Julia tried to speak, but the words would not come out. Thomas, in turn, felt his face flush, his pride crushed by Raphael's success. He could barely look at his colleagues, who stared at him with a mixture of sympathy and silent disdain. After the announcement, Raphael made a point of crossing the room and approaching Julia and Thomas with a firm and friendly gaze. "I hope we can work together and build something even greater for the company," he said, with a politeness that sounded almost like a challenge. Julia, helpless, tried to force a smile. "Of course, it will be a pleasure," she replied, swallowing the anger that burned inside her. Raphael looked directly at Thomas, who avoided his gaze. "Thomas, I've always thought that the people who achieve the most success are the ones who treat everyone with respect, no matter where they come from." He paused, watching the couple's reaction. "I hope we can create a culture of respect here. Everyone deserves an opportunity, and I believe that together, we can transform this place." With those words, Raphael walked away again, leaving Julia and Thomas in an uncomfortable silence. Julia and Thomas fell silent, each absorbing the impact of Raphael's words. That night, which should have been another opportunity to show off their position and influence, had turned into an unexpected nightmare. Julia felt her pride crumbling, as if each word Raphael had said had been a direct blow to her certainties and the image she maintained of herself and her husband. "Thomas," she murmured, breaking the silence, "we can't leave things like this. Raphael, he has no right to humiliate us like this." Thomas sighed, frustrated. "He didn't humiliate us, Julia. He just showed us that we underestimated someone who had the courage and determination to change his own story." He looked at his wife with a tired expression. "Maybe he's right about respect, you know? I never imagined he could go this far. But who are we to judge?" Julia, still resentful, cast a disdainful look at where Raphael was talking to other executives. "So now, you're going to defend him? After everything? Thomas, he's stealing our spotlight. You were supposed to be the center of this party." Thomas shook his head, irritated by his wife's insistence. "Julia, maybe it's time we review what really matters. There's no point in pretending we're superior. He worked hard, and we keep bragging about titles and appearances." Thomas's voice trembled with accumulated frustration and fatigue. Julia opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of the host calling the guests for the closing toast. She felt a pang of anger and helplessness, unable to process what she had just heard from her own husband. As everyone gathered around the stage, Raphael, now officially the new vice president, raised his glass in toast. He glanced at Julia and Thomas for a brief moment, but said nothing. He simply toasted them with a small smile and a look of serenity that somehow carried a silent victory. After the toast, the guests began to disperse, and Raphael, surrounded by colleagues and admirers, was too busy to notice the couple quietly leaving. Julia and Thomas left the event in silence, each with their own thoughts, Raphael's words echoing as a reminder that sometimes the things we try hardest to hide are the things that end up being revealed the most. As they walked to their car, Thomas broke the silence. "Julia, maybe this is a chance for us to change too. To learn something from this." She glanced at him, but didn't respond, lost in a mixture of wounded pride and a strange sense of defeat. In the silence of the early morning, as Julia and Thomas drove home, every mile they traveled seemed to increase the tension between them. Julia still felt betrayed by fate, while Thomas, who had been forced to confront his own limitations, was more introspective than ever. A few days later, life returned to its normal routine. Thomas, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, continued to work at the company, although Raphael's presence as his superior caused him daily discomfort. Julia, on the other hand, refused to let go of her wounded pride. She avoided social events and comments about Raphael's promotion, trying in vain to regain the image of superiority she had cultivated for so many years. But then, something unexpected happened. One morning, Thomas received a message from the company's management asking him to attend a special meeting. The tone was urgent. He entered the meeting room with Julia at his side, both trying to hide their anxiety. To their surprise, they found Raphael sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by some of the top executives. Raphael greeted them with a nod, his gaze serene but attentive. "Thomas, Julia, thank you for coming. There's something I want to share with you." Thomas glanced quickly at Julia, who tried to hide her nervousness. Raphael continued, "Over the past few days, I've thought a lot about our interaction that night, and I've realized that respect is something we need to show and teach, even to those who look down on us. I know what it's like to be underestimated, and so I'd like to offer you an opportunity." Julia's mouth fell open, unsure of what to expect. Raphael then announced, "The company is starting a mentoring program for employees who want to grow but haven't had the same opportunities as others. I want you to lead this project to help those who, like me in the past, need a helping hand and someone to encourage them." Thomas was stunned. He expected a reprimand, perhaps even retaliation, but here Raphael was offering him a meaningful and challenging role. In a low, sincere voice, Thomas replied, Raphael, I don't know what to say. Thank you for your trust. Raphael smiled, extending his hand to Thomas. Everyone deserves a chance to change, Thomas. I believe you can help others see the best in themselves. And who knows, this journey may be a transformation for you too. Julia silently looked at her husband and then at Raphael, feeling something she had never experienced before: genuine gratitude. For the first time, she understood that true greatness was not in appearances or arrogant words, but in the ability to forgive and inspire. When they left the meeting, Thomas and Julia had a new perspective. From that day on, they dedicated themselves to the project, learning stories from struggle and overcoming, and little by little, rediscovering values that they had left behind. The mentoring journey not only benefited the employees, but also transformed the couple, who finally learned the lesson that Raphael had tried to teach from the beginning. Months later, at a company event, Thomas and Julia were by Raphael's side, this time as allies and mentors, renewed by the experience of helping and being helped. Their story, marked by pride and redemption, became an example of humility and growth. And, in the end, they understood that true greatness lay in building together, with respect and purpose, a path that would inspire not only